Level 51. Memory Implantation. Memory implantation is the process of planting false memories into someone's mind. Memories that feel real, but never actually happened. It's not science fiction. Through suggestion, storytelling, or repeated exposure, the brain can be tricked into constructing entirely fabricated events. And once implanted, these false memories can become just as vivid, emotional, and convincing as real ones. One of the most well-documented examples is the Lost in the Mall experiment, where researchers convinced participants they were once lost in a shopping mall as a child, even when their families confirmed it never happened. In more everyday scenarios, it shows up when a manipulator insists, "You always do this," or "Don't you remember what you said?" slowly bending reality until the victim questions their own mind. Why is this so powerful? Because if you can control someone's memory, you can control their narrative. False memories can create guilt, fear, or misplaced loyalty. They can be used to rewrite conflicts, reframe relationships, or create a dependency on the manipulator. It's psychological warfare disguised as casual conversation. Avoiding memory implantation starts with awareness. Be wary of people who frequently remind you of things you don't recall or twist past events to their benefit. Keep a journal, your own written reality, and most importantly, trust your gut. If a memory feels off, question it. Because in the wrong hands, your mind isn't a vault, it's wet clay. Memory implantation doesn't require hypnosis or sci-fi technology, just repetition, confidence, and time. And for those who understand that, the human mind becomes the most dangerous tool of all. Level 52, Disassociation Induction. Disassociation induction is the deliberate act of disconnecting someone from their sense of reality, identity, or emotions. It's a manipulation tactic rooted in dark psychology, designed to fragment a person's mental state and make them more susceptible to control. When someone is dissociated, they feel numb, spaced out, or detached from their surroundings. And in that fog, the manipulator steps in. This tactic often shows up subtly. Constant gaslighting, "You're overreacting, that never happened," makes the victim question their emotions and perceptions. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, or rapid mood shifts can also induce disassociation, especially when paired with intense emotional events. Over time, the victim begins to float through life in a trance-like state, unsure of what's real or who to trust. For the manipulator, this creates a blank canvas. A dissociated person is easier to influence because they're mentally checked out. They stop resisting. They stop asking questions. They become dependent on external cues, usually the abuser's cues, to understand what's happening around them. In this state, reality is no longer defined internally, but by the person pulling the strings. To avoid falling into disassociation, ground yourself. Maintain routines. Stay connected with people outside the manipulative dynamic, and notice when you start feeling detached or numb. Breathwork, journaling, and mindfulness practices can pull you back into the present moment. Most importantly, don't ignore those creeping feelings of confusion or emptiness. They're often red flags that someone is subtly pulling you away from yourself. Disassociation induction is powerful because it doesn't just influence behavior, it erodes the self. And once that's gone, what's left is an obedient shell, ready to be filled with whatever narrative the manipulator desires. Level 53, Illusory Superiority Reinforcement. Illusory superiority is the cognitive bias that leads people to overestimate their intelligence, skills, or moral standing compared to others. In dark psychology, manipulators exploit this flaw by reinforcing it, feeding inflated self-images to gain control. It's flattery with a purpose, weaponized ego. The manipulator might say things like, "You're smarter than everyone else," or "You're the only one who truly gets it." They create a sense of exclusivity, making the target feel chosen, enlightened, or uniquely talented. It feels good, almost addictive. But behind the compliments lies a trap. Once convinced of their superiority, the victim becomes easier to isolate, manipulate, and steer. Common examples include cult leaders convincing followers they're part of a special elite, toxic partners boosting one's ego only to later twist that trust, or even con artists luring victims with praise to cloud their judgment. By reinforcing someone's belief that they're above average, the manipulator lowers their defenses. Flattered minds ask fewer questions. This gives the manipulator a major advantage: control without resistance. A person caught in this illusion is more likely to reject criticism, ignore warnings from others, and believe they're immune to deception, all while being deeply manipulated. To avoid this trap, stay grounded. Seek honest feedback from people you trust. Reflect on your actions, not just your intentions. Confidence is healthy. Unchecked ego is vulnerable. Be especially cautious when someone praises you too frequently or too intensely, especially if it's used to separate you from others. Illusory superiority reinforcement is a slow, seductive form of manipulation. It doesn't use fear, it uses pride. And once you believe you're too smart to be manipulated, you've already lost. Level 54. Creating false dilemmas. A false dilemma, also known as a false dichotomy, is a manipulation tactic where someone presents only two options, when in reality, more exist. It's a classic trick in dark psychology. Limit a person's perceived choices, and you limit their power to act freely. The goal isn't to inform, it's to corner. Manipulators use false dilemmas to push their targets toward a desired outcome by framing the situation as either or. For example, "You're either with me or against me," or "If you don't do this, you clearly don't care about me." The options are emotionally charged, often designed so that one appears obviously wrong or guilt-inducing, leaving the target feeling boxed in. In relationships, it might sound like, "If you really loved me, you'd prove it by staying." In workplaces, "You can take this deal now or lose everything." Politicians, salespeople, cult leaders, and even friends can use false dilemmas to force compliance or emotional submission. The advantage for the manipulator is clear. They get to dictate the battlefield. When someone believes there are only two ways forward, they're less likely to think critically, ask questions, or push back. It fosters urgency, fear, and impulsive decisions. To protect yourself, pause and analyze. Ask, are these really the only two options? Seek a third path. Consult outsiders who aren't emotionally invested in the situation. Most importantly, remember that pressure often signals manipulation. Real choices rarely come in rigid binaries. False dilemmas don't just limit your choices, they shape your reality. And once someone controls your perception of what's possible, they no longer need chains to keep you captive. All they need is a question with only two answers, both of which serve them. Level 55, Control via Confusion. Confusion is a powerful weapon in the manipulator's toolkit. When someone is disoriented, mentally overwhelmed, emotionally spun, or unsure of what's real, they become vulnerable. Control via confusion is a dark psychology tactic where clarity is deliberately replaced with chaos so the manipulator can seize power while the victim is too mentally fogged to resist. This confusion can be created in many ways: contradicting statements, shifting expectations, sudden emotional outbursts, or even subtle language games. One moment, you're being praised, then criticized the next. Plans constantly change, boundaries blur. The result? You start second-guessing your own thoughts, walking on eggshells, and depending on the manipulator for clarity and direction. Common examples include abusive partners who gaslight with, "I never said that," even when they did, or bosses who change goals without warning and then blame you for not keeping up. Cults and high-pressure groups use relentless information overload or jargon to destabilize members, making them more pliable. Even scammers exploit confusion, rushing victims with technical terms or fake urgency to short-circuit rational thinking. For the manipulator, confusion creates a power vacuum. In that haze, they become the sole source of truth. They can implant ideas, change narratives, and demand loyalty because the victim no longer trusts their own mind. To guard against this tactic, slow down. Clarity is your weapon. Document conversations, write down facts, and revisit them when you feel overwhelmed. Don't be afraid to say, "I need time to think." Talk to outsiders, those not trapped in the fog. Confusion isn't always accidental. Sometimes it's the whole point. Because when you don't know which way is up, you'll follow the loudest voice. And in the hands of a manipulator, that voice becomes your compass, even if it's leading you off a cliff. Level 56, False Emotional Reciprocity. False emotional reciprocity is the act of faking emotional investment to create a sense of connection, obligation, or intimacy, only to exploit it later. In dark psychology, it's a strategic performance. The manipulator pretends to care, love, or empathize, not because they feel it, but because they know you do. It starts with mirroring, reflecting your feelings, interests, or vulnerabilities. They say the right things, offer just enough affection, and mimic emotional openness. You begin to trust them, believe in a bond, and let your guard down. But that emotional intimacy isn't real. It's bait. Common examples include love bombing in toxic relationships, where someone showers you with attention and affection early on, only to later manipulate you with guilt, withdrawal, or control. In friendships or workplaces, it might be someone constantly offering support, then later saying, "After everything I've done for you," as a way to pressure compliance. The advantage for the manipulator is profound. Emotions cloud logic. Once you believe someone truly cares, you're far more likely to overlook red flags, forgive toxic behavior, or do things against your best interest out of loyalty. They create a debt, an emotional IOU, that was never genuine to begin with. To protect yourself, move slowly with emotional investments. Real connection takes time. Pay attention to consistency. Does their behavior match their words over time, or only when it benefits them? Notice if their care disappears the moment you stop giving them what they want. False emotional reciprocity is a master stroke of manipulation because it feels like love, friendship, or trust. But it's a trap wrapped in warmth. And by the time you realize it wasn't mutual, you've already given away pieces of yourself that are hard to reclaim. Level 57, Reality Distortion Field. A reality distortion field is a psychological force created by someone so persuasive, confident, or charismatic that they can warp how others perceive truth. Originally coined to describe Steve Jobs' uncanny ability to make people believe the impossible, in the context of dark psychology, RDF becomes something far more sinister, a manipulator's ability to reshape facts, rewrite events, and redefine what's real for their own gain. The user doesn't lie outright. They reframe. They speak with absolute certainty, blur contradictions, and exude unwavering confidence. Soon, their version of reality starts to feel more real than your own. You begin to question yourself. Maybe I misremembered. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm overreacting. Common examples include cult leaders who redefine morality, abusers who rewrite shared history. That's not how it happened. Or narcissistic bosses who create toxic work environments but convince employees they're part of something revolutionary. The manipulator builds a self-contained world where their logic rules and loyalty is rewarded. The advantage for the user is total control. In a distorted reality, resistance becomes harder because the terms of reality itself have shifted. Victims become dependent on the manipulator to interpret what's true, what's important, and what matters. To avoid falling into someone's RDF, anchor yourself in outside perspectives. Keep a journal to track your version of events. Fact-check claims. Surround yourself with people who aren't under the manipulator's influence. And most importantly, trust your gut when something feels off, even if it's hard to explain why. A reality distortion field isn't magic. It's mastery of human psychology. And once someone starts bending your perception, they no longer need to convince you to follow. You'll walk their path willingly, believing it was your idea all along. Level 58, Mental Mirroring. Mental mirroring is the manipulative technique of imitating someone's thoughts, values, and emotional patterns to build trust and lower defenses. When done strategically, it creates a loop, a feedback cycle, where the target begins to feel seen, understood, and emotionally bonded to the manipulator. In dark psychology, this isn't about connection, it's about control. The manipulator listens closely, watches your body language, picks up your speech patterns, mirrors your worldview. They adopt your insecurities, your humor, even your trauma. Suddenly you're thinking, wow, no one's ever understood me like this. But it's an illusion. They're not revealing themselves. They're reflecting you back at yourself. Common examples include toxic partners who claim we're the same person early in relationships, or cult recruiters who mimic your doubts and beliefs to build rapid intimacy. Con artists use this in scams, mirroring values like family or ambition to make their pitch seem perfectly tailored. Even in workplaces, manipulative leaders might echo your concerns, only to twist them later for leverage. The advantage? Mirroring builds trust fast. Once you feel someone gets you on a deep level, you open up. You share more. You become attached. The manipulator then gradually shifts the reflection, subtly introducing their own ideas, rewriting your values, and bending your identity. You think you're evolving. In reality, you're being reshaped. To avoid this loop, watch for people who always agree or seem too similar too quickly. Healthy connections involve differences and friction. Question relationships that escalate emotional intimacy at unnatural speeds. And ask yourself, do they actually share these beliefs, or are they just reflecting mine? Mental mirroring isn't about empathy, it's about mimicry. And once you're caught in the loop, it's hard to tell where you end and they begin. Level 59, Phantom Validation. Phantom validation is the illusion of approval, a psychological manipulation where praise, recognition, or affection is dangled just out of reach. It's not about genuinely uplifting someone. It's about keeping them chasing a feeling that never fully arrives. In dark psychology, this creates a loop of dependency. The more effort you give, the more you crave a validation that never truly comes. The manipulator offers just enough positive reinforcement to hook you. A compliment here, a smile there. But when you seek real affirmation, emotional support, recognition, love, they pull back. Suddenly, you're doing more, trying harder, bending over backwards for a reward that always feels one step away. Almost. Not quite. Maybe next time. Common examples include toxic bosses who praise your potential but never promote you. Partners who say, "You'd be perfect out if you just changed this one thing." Or friends who withhold compliments but give backhanded ones to keep you insecure and striving. It's also a favorite tool in social dynamics, used to maintain power by keeping others off balance. The advantage is control. A person chasing phantom validation becomes easy to mold. They're constantly seeking approval, which makes them emotionally invested and easily manipulated. Their self-worth becomes tied to the manipulator's inconsistent cues, turning validation into a leash. To avoid falling into this trap, define your own standards. Seek internal validation over external approval. Surround yourself with people who offer consistent support, not just strategic praise. And ask yourself, am I being seen, or am I just being strung along? Phantom validation thrives in silence and self-doubt. But once you recognize the pattern, you take back power. Real validation empowers you. Phantom validation enslaves you. And the longer you chase it, the more lost in the game you become. Level 60, Self-Doubt Programming. Self-doubt programming is a manipulation tactic designed to make you question your own thoughts, decisions, and worth, until you stop trusting yourself and start relying on someone else to think for you. In dark psychology, it's not about breaking your will all at once. It's about eroding it, slowly and surgically, until there's nothing left but hesitation and dependence. The manipulator does this through subtle digs and helpful criticisms. Are you sure that's the right choice? You always get so emotional. You're just overthinking again. Each comment plants a seed. Over time, you begin to second-guess everything. Your memory, your judgment, even your identity. Common examples include toxic relationships where one partner constantly undermines the other's confidence, or workplaces where a superior subtly discredits your ideas in front of others. Even friends and family can use it to maintain control, dismissing your goals, mocking your ideas, or labeling you too sensitive anytime you push back. For the manipulator, this is pure leverage. A person filled with self-doubt is far easier to control. They ask for permission, defer to authority, and stay quiet even when they know something's wrong. By hollowing out your self-trust, the manipulator positions themselves as the voice of reason, your only reliable guide. To resist self-doubt programming, track patterns. Are you constantly apologizing? Do you feel anxious making decisions you used to handle confidently? Start documenting your choices and outcomes. It's evidence that you can trust yourself. Seek validation from within, not from someone whose approval always comes with a sting. Self-doubt isn't a natural state. It's often implanted. And once it takes root, it becomes the prison bars you carry with you. But awareness is the key. Because once you recognize the programming, you can start to rewrite it. Level 61. Isolation from support systems. Isolation from support systems is a calculated manipulation tactic where the manipulator slowly, or sometimes abruptly, separates their target from friends, family, or outside influences. The goal is simple. Remove all competing voices so that their voice becomes the only one that matters. In dark psychology, isolation isn't just physical. It's emotional, social, and psychological disconnection, designed to leave you vulnerable and easier to control. This often starts subtly. Your friends don't really understand you. Your family always stresses you out. We don't need anyone else. We're enough. The manipulator frames loved ones as toxic, jealous, or unsupportive. Over time, calls stop, visits fade, and eventually, you're alone, orbiting entirely around them. Common examples include abusive partners discouraging or outright forbidding contact with others, cults demanding total loyalty by severing outside ties, or even controlling employers who expect complete devotion at the expense of personal life. In every case, the message is the same. Only we care about you. Everyone else is a threat. For the manipulator, isolation is power. Without outside perspectives, the victim becomes easier to gaslight, exploit, and reshape. There's no one left to say, "That's not normal," or "You deserve better." And without comparison, even mistreatment can start to feel like love. To avoid or escape this tactic, regularly check in with trusted people outside the relationship or environment. Notice if you're being discouraged from spending time with others, or made to feel guilty when you do. Healthy connections support your independence. Toxic ones fear it. Isolation from support systems isn't just about being alone. It's about being cut off from help, from reality, from yourself. And once you're isolated, even a whisper of manipulation can echo like truth. That's why the strongest armor against control is connection. Level 62. Information control. Information control is a manipulation tactic where access to truth, knowledge, or context is deliberately restricted, distorted, or filtered. The manipulator decides what you're allowed to know and what stays hidden. In dark psychology, this turns information into a tool of domination, because when someone controls the flow of information, they control perception, decisions, and ultimately, reality. It doesn't always look like censorship. It can be as subtle as withholding key details, cherry-picking facts, or flooding you with overwhelming data to bury the truth. They might say, "You don't need to worry about that," or "I'll explain it later." Over time, you stop asking questions and start relying on them for the full picture. Common examples include abusive partners hiding finances or conversations, cults limiting outside media or contact, or manipulative employers who withhold policy changes until it benefits them. Even in one-on-one dynamics, a person might reframe events, spread selective truths, or conceal messages to create false impressions. The manipulator's advantage is immense. By controlling what you know, they shape how you think and act. They can hide their wrongdoings, create false narratives, and engineer emotional reactions. You can't challenge what you don't see. And when the truth is filtered through them, trust becomes obedience, To protect yourself, diversify your sources of truth. If someone discourages questions or punishes curiosity, that's a red flag. Keep records, messages, decisions, conversations. Ask for transparency and verify what you're told. If something feels off, it probably is. Information control isn't about lying outright. It's about narrowing the lens until you only see what benefits them. And in a world where knowledge is power, the most dangerous kind of manipulation is the one that makes you think you're fully informed when you're anything but. Level 63, Thought-Terminating Clichés. Thought-terminating clichés are short, emotionally charged phrases used to shut down critical thinking and end uncomfortable conversations. In dark psychology, they serve as mental dead ends, designed not to inform, but to silence. These phrases are often disguised as wisdom, but their true purpose is control. They don't resolve the issue, they make it unthinkable. Common examples include, "It is what it is. Everything happens for a reason. You're overthinking it. That's just how things are. Let's agree to disagree." At first glance, these might seem harmless, even comforting, but when used repeatedly or strategically, they short-circuit deeper inquiry. If you're questioning unfair treatment, unjust systems, or toxic dynamics, these clichés can be weaponized to make you feel like the problem for simply asking. Manipulators use them to maintain dominance by avoiding accountability. When someone says, "You just need to let it go," what they often mean is, "Stop challenging me." These phrases prevent progress, reflection, or growth by making continued thought seem futile or socially unacceptable. The advantage for the manipulator is clear: efficiency. One sentence can end an entire line of questioning. The target is left confused, shut down, or feeling guilty for digging too deep. It keeps the power dynamic unchallenged. To defend against thought-terminating clichés, learn to recognize them. When someone uses one, ask yourself, did that answer the question, or avoid it? Counter with follow-ups like, "What do you mean by that?" Or, "Can we talk about this more?" Stay curious, even when you're told not to be. In manipulation, silence is victory. And these clichés are the quiet weapons used to win without a fight. But once you see them for what they are, you take the first step in reclaiming your voice and your mind. Level 64, Confession Exploitation. Confession exploitation is a dark manipulation tactic where someone encourages you to share personal, painful, or private information, not to build trust, but to use it against you. It's the weaponization of vulnerability. In dark psychology, manipulators don't seek connection through your confessions, they seek control. It starts with emotional intimacy. The manipulator may open up first, share a secret, or ask thoughtful, empathetic questions. You feel safe. You begin to open up, sharing past traumas, regrets, fears, or insecurities. It feels like bonding. But the truth is, they're collecting ammunition. Common examples include toxic partners who later use your insecurities to insult or guilt you. No wonder your ex left. Fake friends who gossip about your secrets, or controlling figures who bring up your confessions at convenient moments to shame, silence, or manipulate you. In cults or high-pressure groups, confession is often encouraged as a ritual, then used to enforce obedience or induce guilt. For the manipulator, the advantage is psychological leverage. Once they know your emotional pressure points, they can trigger you at will. You become hesitant, submissive, afraid of being exposed or judged. It makes confrontation harder boundaries weaker, and escape feel riskier. To avoid confession exploitation, don't mistake early vulnerability for trust. True emotional safety is built over time through consistent, respectful behavior, not just shared secrets. Hold back until someone has earned your trust. And if someone ever throws your words back at you, take it as the warning it is. Your story is sacred. In the wrong hands, it becomes a leash. Confession should be met with compassion, not consequences. And once you realize someone's listening not to understand, but to use, you'll know it's time to stop talking and start walking. Level 65, Repetition of Ideology. Repetition of ideology is a manipulation tactic where a belief, phrase, or worldview is repeated so often that it begins to feel like truth, regardless of its accuracy. In dark psychology, it's not about persuasion through reason, it's about conditioning through consistency. When something is said enough times, the brain stops questioning and starts accepting. This tactic is found in cults, extremist groups, toxic workplaces, and manipulative relationships. It shows up in mantras like, "We're the chosen ones," "You're nothing without me," or "This is just how the world works." Even seemingly harmless slogans, when repeated constantly, can become mental anchors that override logic or experience. The repetition isn't always loud. It can be quiet, casual, and constant, woven into daily conversation, media, or routines. Over time, it seeps into the subconscious. The belief no longer feels like someone else's idea, it feels like yours. For the manipulator, repetition offers powerful advantages. It reduces resistance, doubt fades. The target begins to adopt the ideology as their identity, defending it even when it harms them. They become easier to control, more loyal, less likely to question or leave, because doing so would mean challenging what they now believe to be absolute truth. To avoid this trap, stay curious. Expose yourself to multiple viewpoints. Ask why something is being repeated and who benefits from that belief being accepted without question. Be especially cautious of ideas that discourage debate or brand all disagreement as disloyalty. Repetition can build habit or create prison bars you can't see. The danger isn't always in the message itself. It's in the unthinking acceptance of it. Because once your beliefs are no longer your own, neither are your choices. And that's exactly where the manipulator wants you. Level 66, Sleep Deprivation. Sleep deprivation is more than just exhaustion. It's a powerful manipulation tool that breaks down your mental defenses, emotional regulation, and critical thinking. In dark psychology, it's used to destabilize, disorient, and ultimately control. Because when you're sleep deprived, you're not just tired, you're vulnerable. This tactic is frequently seen in high-control environments. Cults and extremist groups schedule long meetings, rituals, or training sessions deep into the night. Abusive partners may provoke late-night arguments, pick fights before bed, or keep you awake with emotional chaos. Even manipulative workplaces normalize grind culture, where rest is framed as weakness and overwork as loyalty. The science is simple, but brutal. Lack of sleep impairs judgment, increases suggestibility, and lowers resistance to stress. You're more likely to agree to things you wouldn't normally accept, more prone to emotional reactions, and less capable of recognizing manipulation when it happens. In this weakened state, the manipulator positions themselves as the only source of clarity, comfort, or direction. The advantage is clear. Once you're exhausted, you're easier to mold. You can't think critically. You don't have the energy to push back. You just want relief. And they're happy to provide it for a price. To avoid this tactic, protect your sleep like it's sacred. Watch for patterns where others consistently disrupt your rest, especially if it's paired with emotional manipulation or pressure. Create boundaries around bedtime. Step away from late-night arguments or urgent demands that seem to arise only when you're about to rest. Sleep deprivation doesn't look like mind control, but it acts like it. It doesn't need chains, threats, or lies. All it needs is time. Because once you're running on empty, the manipulator doesn't have to overpower your mind. They just have to wait for it to fall apart on its own. Level 67, Forced Dependency. Forced dependency is a manipulation tactic where the manipulator systematically breaks down a person's independence, emotional, financial, or psychological, until the victim believes they can't function without them. In dark psychology, it's a long game, not about immediate control, but about making escape feel impossible. This often begins under the guise of care or support. Let me handle that for you. Or, you don't need to worry, I'll take care of everything. It seems helpful at first, but slowly the target is discouraged from making decisions, handling finances, or pursuing outside relationships. Skills atrophy. Confidence erodes. The manipulator becomes the sole provider, protector, or source of validation. Common examples include abusive partners who insist on managing all money or decisions, cult leaders who isolate followers from external resources, or even overbearing parents who keep adult children emotionally stunted. In workplaces, it might be a boss who withholds training or experience to keep an employee valuable, but stuck. The advantage for the manipulator is absolute control. A dependent person is less likely to rebel, question authority, or leave. They fear the unknown, believe they're incapable without the manipulator's help, and often feel grateful for the very chains that bind them. To avoid or escape forced dependency, build and maintain your autonomy, especially in areas the manipulator tries to help with. Learn skills, manage your own resources, and keep external connections alive. If someone discourages self-sufficiency under the mask of love or loyalty, take a closer look at their intent. Forced dependency isn't always built through violence. Often it's constructed with comfort over time. But once you rely on someone for everything, they don't have to cage you. You'll stay where you are because you've forgotten how to stand on your own. Level 68, Indoctrination. Indoctrination is the process of implanting a specific set of beliefs, values, or ideologies into someone's mind, while discouraging questioning or alternative perspectives. In dark psychology, it's not about education, it's about obedience. The manipulator doesn't want you to think. They want you to accept without hesitation, resistance, or doubt. This tactic is common in cults, extremist groups, and authoritarian systems, but it also appears in toxic relationships, manipulative families, and controlling workplaces. It often begins subtly. This is the only way that works, or everyone else is lying to you. The victim is slowly immersed in a new belief system while being cut off from external input, news, friends, alternative voices. Over time, these repeated messages shape identity. You no longer believe what they say, you believe in them. Common examples include love bombing in cult recruitment, where intense affection is paired with strict ideology, or abusive partners who slowly reshape their victim's worldview. Only I care about you. In high-control work environments, it may appear as relentless company loyalty talk, discouraging outside opportunities or criticism. The advantage for the manipulator is near total psychological dominance. Once someone is indoctrinated, they police their own thoughts. They defend the system even when it hurts them. Dissent feels like betrayal. Escape feels like heresy. To avoid indoctrination, cultivate critical thinking. Expose yourself to multiple sources of information. If a person or group discourages questions, isolates you from others, or labels all outsiders as enemies, that's not protection, it's control. Healthy belief systems invite questions. Toxic ones punish them. Indoctrination is not about force. It's about faith without examination. And once you believe the manipulator holds the truth, you'll stop looking for it anywhere else. That's when belief stops being yours and starts being a tool used against you. Level 69, Trauma Bonding. Trauma bonding is a psychological trap where a person forms a deep emotional attachment to someone who repeatedly harms them. In the world of manipulation and dark psychology, it's one of the most insidious tools because it turns pain into loyalty and suffering into dependence. The cycle begins with moments of kindness or love, followed by episodes of cruelty, neglect, or manipulation. Then just when the victim is at their lowest, the abuser offers affection again, creating a powerful emotional whiplash. Over time, this unpredictable mix of abuse and reward conditions the victim to cling to the abuser even more tightly, hoping for the return of the good times. Common examples include abusive romantic relationships, where the victim feels unable to leave because of shared history or rare moments of affection. It also shows up in cults or extremist groups that use shame, fear, and conditional love to keep members attached. Even toxic friendships or family dynamics can produce trauma bonds, where emotional chaos is mistaken for deep connection. The manipulator's advantage is total emotional control. The victim becomes addicted to the highs and lows, mistaking manipulation for intimacy. They may even defend their abuser, justify mistreatment, or turn against those trying to help. It's not weakness, it's programming. To escape trauma bonding, recognize the pattern, not just the person. Keep a journal to track cycles of abuse and affection. Talk to someone outside the dynamic, a friend, therapist, or support group. And most importantly, understand. Love doesn't require pain, and connection shouldn't feel like survival. Trauma bonding convinces you that the person hurting you is also the only one who can heal you. But that's the lie it feeds on. And once you see it for what it is, you can begin to break free. Level 70, Creating Scapegoats. Creating scapegoats is a manipulative tactic where blame, guilt, or responsibility is unfairly shifted onto another person, often the most vulnerable, so the real manipulator can avoid accountability and maintain control. In dark psychology, the scapegoat becomes a convenient distraction, a lightning rod for frustration, and a shield for the manipulator's own flaws. This tactic is used in families, workplaces, social groups, and authoritarian systems. A toxic parent might consistently blame one child for family conflict, labeling them the problem to avoid confronting their own dysfunction. In the workplace, a manager may point to an underperforming employee whenever leadership questions arise, regardless of whether the issues are systemic. Even cults and abusive groups use external enemies or internal traitors to keep members united and emotionally dependent. Scapegoating serves several key purposes. It deflects criticism, preserves the manipulator's image, and keeps others in fear of being the next target. It also creates a false sense of control. If everything is their fault, then no one questions deeper issues. And for the group, blaming a scapegoat can provide emotional release, bonding through shared hostility rather than truth. To avoid being caught in or complicit with scapegoating, always question narratives that place all blame on one person, especially when the accuser benefits. Watch for patterns, repeated targeting, exaggerated faults, or situations where the guilty party isn't allowed to defend themselves. Seek the bigger picture before taking sides. If you are being scapegoated, document everything. Get outside perspectives and remind yourself, being blamed doesn't mean being guilty. Creating scapegoats isn't just about assigning blame. It's about rewriting reality. And once someone else becomes the permanent villain, the real manipulator walks free, hidden behind the smoke of a lie everyone was told to believe. Level 71. Controlled access to food or comfort. Controlled access to food, rest, affection, or basic comfort is a subtle yet powerful form of manipulation rooted in dark psychology. By regulating the essentials of well-being, the manipulator establishes dominance, not through force but through need. When comfort becomes a privilege instead of a right, the victim learns to obey just to survive. This tactic appears in abusive relationships, cults, authoritarian households, and even toxic workplaces. A partner may withhold meals during arguments or only cook when they're being obeyed. Cult leaders often restrict food and sleep to weaken resistance and increase compliance. In work environments, bosses may tie breaks, snacks, or time off to arbitrary performance metrics, making basic needs feel like earned rewards rather than human necessities. The result is learned dependency. The victim begins to associate nourishment or rest with approval. Over time, they'll suppress their own needs, desires, and even identity just to keep the peace and gain a small comfort. The manipulator, in turn, becomes the gatekeeper of relief, both the source of suffering and the only path to respite. This creates a powerful psychological bind. You become grateful for things that should never have been withheld in the first place. To avoid or escape this control, recognize when basic needs are being used as leverage. Food, sleep, affection, and personal comfort should never be contingent on obedience or emotional submission. If someone makes you feel guilty for asking to rest, eat, or be warm, question their intent, not your worth. Healthy relationships and environments respect your humanity. Manipulative ones exploit it. Controlled access to comfort isn't about care. It's about control. And when your body is starving or your mind is worn down, the manipulator doesn't have to break your will. They just have to be the only one holding the keys to relief. Level 72. Perpetual guilt loops. A perpetual guilt loop is a manipulative cycle where someone is made to feel endlessly guilty, no matter what they do. It's not about right or wrong. It's about keeping the target emotionally trapped, constantly apologizing, and forever trying to make up for something that was never fully defined in the first place. In dark psychology, guilt becomes a leash, and the manipulator holds the other end. This tactic often starts with small criticisms, framed as concern. I just feel like you don't care, after all I've done for you. Over time, it evolves into chronic emotional debt. Even when the victim tries to fix things, it's never enough. The rules shift. The offense is reinterpreted. The guilt is renewed. Common examples include toxic partners who constantly revisit past arguments, never letting them die, or parents who make their children feel indebted for being raised. In cult-like environments, guilt is institutionalized. Followers are told they are inherently flawed, and only the group can absolve them. For the manipulator, the advantage is psychological domination. A guilty person is more obedient, more eager to please, and less likely to rebel. Guilt drains self-worth and erodes the ability to trust one's own judgment. Eventually, the victim internalizes the blame, punishing themselves without prompting. To break free, recognize the pattern, not just the words. If you're always apologizing but never forgiven, something is wrong. Set emotional boundaries. Ask yourself, am I guilty, or am I being made to feel that way? Healthy people allow for resolution. Manipulators don't. Because keeping you in a guilt loop means keeping you under control. Perpetual guilt isn't accountability, it's imprisonment. And once you learn to separate real remorse from manufactured shame, you reclaim the power to walk away unapologetically. Level 73, Ritual Humiliation. Ritual humiliation is a dark manipulation tactic that uses repeated deliberate embarrassment to degrade a person's self-worth while reinforcing the manipulator's dominance. It's not just a one-time insult. It's a performance, often done in front of others, where the target is mocked, belittled, or shamed as a form of psychological conditioning. This tactic is commonly used in abusive relationships, toxic friend groups, cults, hazing rituals, and authoritarian workplaces. It might look like a partner constantly making jokes at your expense in front of others, a group repeatedly teasing someone for a perceived weakness, or a leader forcing public apologies or confessions to assert control. In cults or extremist systems, members may be made to confess sins or flaws in front of the group, reinforcing submission and hierarchy. The purpose is twofold: to destroy the victim's self-image and to demonstrate the manipulator's absolute power. Over time, the victim internalizes the shame and begins to believe they deserve this treatment. The audience, meanwhile, whether peers or bystanders, learns that stepping out of line has consequences. For the manipulator, ritual humiliation reinforces control through fear, compliance, and dependency. It creates a hierarchy where the only escape from shame is submission. To avoid or escape this tactic, recognize that humiliation is not discipline or tough love. It's abuse. Pay attention to how often you're made to feel small in front of others. If someone routinely crosses your boundaries and hides behind just joking, they're not teasing, they're training. Protect your dignity like your life depends on it. Because psychologically, it does. Healthy relationships build you up in private and in public. Manipulative ones tear you down for sport. And once humiliation becomes routine, silence becomes complicity. Break the cycle before it breaks you. Level 74, Forced Loyalty Oaths. Forced loyalty oaths are explicit or implied demands for unwavering allegiance, used by manipulators to solidify control and eliminate dissent. In dark psychology, loyalty isn't earned, it's extracted. These oaths often appear in the form of verbal promises, public declarations, or symbolic acts that bind the victim emotionally, socially, or psychologically to the manipulator. This tactic shows up in abusive relationships, where a partner might say, "Promise you'll never leave me, no matter what." In cults or extremist groups, members are made to renounce outsiders, swear allegiance to a leader, or participate in rituals that demonstrate loyalty. Even in workplaces or social circles, manipulators may push for declarations like, "You're either with us or against us," forcing people to choose sides without nuance. The goal isn't trust, it's submission. Once someone publicly pledges loyalty, it becomes harder to question or leave without feeling like a traitor. The manipulator gains a powerful tool, guilt. Breaking the oath, even for good reason, now carries emotional weight. And with that weight comes control. The advantage for the manipulator is long-term obedience. Loyalty oaths lock people in, isolate them from alternative perspectives, and make them emotionally invested in defending the very system that traps them. It weaponizes commitment. To avoid this trap, be wary of anyone who demands unconditional loyalty, especially early in a relationship, group, or cause. Healthy bonds allow for disagreement, freedom, and growth. Loyalty built on coercion isn't loyalty, it's captivity. Ask yourself, am I being asked to be loyal to a person or to an idea that cannot be questioned? Real trust doesn't require a vow. And once you're forced to promise loyalty, you're not being honored, you're being owned. Recognize the difference and reclaim your right to walk away. Level 75, Thought Policing. Thought policing is a dark psychological tactic where individuals are manipulated into monitoring, suppressing, or punishing their own thoughts, usually to conform to a specific belief system or to avoid perceived consequences. The goal isn't just behavioral control, it's mental submission. When someone polices their own thoughts, the manipulator no longer needs to enforce rules. They live rent-free inside the victim's mind. This tactic often appears in cults, authoritarian environments, and toxic relationships. Common phrases include, "Even thinking that is wrong." "If you truly loved me, that thought wouldn't cross your mind." Real believers don't even question this. Over time, victims learn to repress doubts, guilt themselves for natural emotional responses, and fear their own inner dialogue. They internalize the rules so deeply that they correct themselves before the manipulator even speaks. In high-control groups, thought policing is often reinforced with confessions, group surveillance, or teachings that equate thoughts with sins. In relationships, it might show up as a partner, punishing imagined disloyalty. I know what you're thinking. The result is a psychological prison with invisible bars. The advantage for the manipulator is maximum control with minimal effort. When victims start regulating their own thoughts, they become passive, obedient, and emotionally isolated. The internal critic replaces the external enforcer. To avoid falling into this trap, recognize that thoughts are not crimes. You're not responsible for every passing feeling or mental question, only for how you choose to act. Surround yourself with people who encourage reflection and nuance, not conformity and fear. Thought policing isn't about protecting values. It's about suppressing identity. And once someone convinces you to fear your own mind, they don't need to control your behavior. You'll do it for them and thank them for the privilege.